Good evening, Kevin. Nice to see you.
Thank you for joining us. Did you share my rage when Sadiq Khan said, well, we've all got to save the planet, so if you've got an old diesel car or a gas guzzling car, go and get a new one?
Oh, absolutely. And these are many of the points that I put to him today in the question time session we had. I mean, just to set a bit of context for maybe some of your viewers, listeners that don't know about this, that the ultra low emission zone used to exist just in the centre of London. So it would exist in that congestion charge zone. And it's worth noting there that drivers driving into the centre of London were going to be hit by not just that congestion charge, but also the ULEZ charge. Well, what Sadiq Khan, the mayor, is proposing to do now is expand that out to the south and the north, which is just going to mean that huge numbers more people have to pay to drive in. And it's £12.50 a day to drive in. So this is not a small amount of money. And our concern is that by expanding this, he's going to hit some of the poorest Londoners and some of the poorest people in our community. And we don't think that's good enough.
I wouldn't envy having your job, Peter, sitting opposite that guy. I mean, does he have any concept what he's doing, the damage he's inflicting on the greatest city on earth?
I'm a relatively new member, Kevin, so I've only been there about 4 or 5 weeks. And so I've done 2 mayor's question times at the moment. But I'm already realizing that they're not actually mayor's question times. They're mayor's pass the blame times. It's always somebody else's fault. And I think the fact that he's out of touch with Londoners is just demonstrated by this current policy. I mean, there were existing schemes in place that did help people by providing some money for scrappage, but 2 of those has been cancelled and 1 is running out of cash. What we were proposing to him today is that we've found £50 million worth of cash that's sitting in the City Hall Business Reserve Fund. And we're saying that could be used to support some of those Londoners who are going to be absolutely whacked by this charge.
Yes, I mean, well, it's not just motorists, like to have a car to drive to work or whatever. It's van drivers, it's people with businesses. Their vehicles are their livelihoods. So apart from the fact he's saying, well, if you don't meet the new standards, you should go and get a new one. And apart from the fact they can't afford it, he's making it almost impossible to drive around this city anyway because of, all these ridiculous cycle lanes and pedestrian areas. I mean, he wants to cordon off a vast swathe of the West End for just pedestrians. So how are businesses going to get deliveries? How are they going to dispatch their goods? Why is he doing this? He's at war with his own city.
I mean, you're absolutely right, especially at a time when the city is trying to recover post-pandemic. And as you say, this is going to hit sole traders, it's going to hit charities, it's going to hit SMEs. One of the things I asked him today, I had a couple of questions that I put to him today, was how many vehicles are going to be impacted by this? Do we know? And he didn't know. He didn't have the figure. But to be fair to him, he said he would write to me. But we're getting reports that it's something like 1 in 5 vehicles are going to be impacted by this. The other issue is that the existing scheme that's there looks like it's running out of cash. So I asked him today, is there enough in there to support people that are going to need that extra help? And he admitted it was running low. That's why we put our proposal forward to support with £50 million from that business rate reserve. It's extraordinary. When he was questioned about this yesterday, and you highlighted this, the Evening Standard asked him, how people would cope. And I'll read it out because it's almost unbelievable.
Please do.
When he was asked about this, he said, you don't need to buy a brand new vehicle. You can buy a second-hand vehicle. Right? As if people are struggling to pay the £12.50 a day to drive in, they're not just going to pop down to a used car salesperson and pick up a new one. This is really patronising, and it's not fair to those Londoners who are struggling. I mean, he went on to say that the good news, right? The good news is that for your vehicle to be ULEZ compliant, it's not that expensive. I don't know if he's suggesting that everybody sort of pops down to some sort of, second-hand Sadiq's and gets a new car. People just don't live like that. If people are struggling, they're really going to be hit by this. Yeah. And so we think he's being patronising, and we don't think he's being fair to some Londoners that really need our help.
Yeah, it's all right for him on his 150 grand a year and his chauffeur-driven Range Rover, right?
Well, that's quite right. And one of the things I said to him today is that he's leaving the poorest Londoners with just a really stark choice. They've got the option to pay the daily charge to drive in, or they've got an option to pay an Arthur daily charge to go out and get a new car. And, we just think he's out of touch with ordinary Londoners.
I want to stress that I'm not really talking behind his back, because we asked Sadiq Khan to come on to Talk Radio on a monotonously regular basis, and on a similar monotonously regular basis he declines, so he can take what he has to take from me, because he doesn't want to answer back. So what I think about him, I think he's a classic left-wing Labour politician who, in a really antediluvian way, sees owners of cars as wealthy Tories, an absolutely useless 1960s, 1970s view of the world, total nonsense, and he's anti-business as well, in that old-fashioned Labour left-wing way.
It's understanding the way that Londoners live right across our metropolis. So I'm incredibly fortunate to represent Bexley and Bromley. Now, these are huge areas with a mix of populations. There's big rural areas, and then there's areas you would think of being sort of in a London. People need cars here to get around. Of
course they
right?
do.
There isn't transport infrastructure. This isn't a luxury. This is people getting to work. This is people dropping the kids off. This is people running their small businesses. And the mayor, by expanding this charge out to the South Circular, is going to hit these Londoners really hard. And you're right, he seems to drive it through with an ideological zeal and not a huge amount of logic. And if I could say, Kevin,
yeah,
I mean, if the mayor isn't coming on, I mean, that's not a real problem. What you could do is just record a tape of him blaming everybody.
Yeah.
Blaming the previous mayor, blaming the government. He doesn't take responsibility for anything. And that's what's interesting about this expanding ULEZ. This is his choice, right? This is his decision. Now, he will say he's being forced to do it, but he's not taking responsibility for the things he should take responsibility for. This, the proposed boundary tracks, there's a myriad of issues that the mayor takes decisions on, but doesn't take responsibility for. And this is, I think, an existential threat to Londoners.